Hello again, everyone. Tom Degorski in the Cipher Brief virtual studio. Good to have you with us for a conversation today about Turkey. As I think our audience is well aware, a critical country, not just in the region, but beyond. This week, Donald Trump has spoken with his counterpart, President Erdogan, in Turkey, and there are plans in place, it appears, for a visit of the Turkish leader to the White House in April. A lot to cover here, and we're delighted to be joined by James Jeffrey, former ambassador to Turkey, to Iraq, to other countries, and all sorts of high level posts. We could spend all our time talking about his resume, but we won't. Ambassador, it's great to have you with us. And just a kind of table setting question to start, if I could. All kinds of countries, big and small, are kind of calibrating their own responses to things that have come from Washington and the White House in the first months of the Trump administration. Take us in, if you can, to the view from Turkey. What will they be most concerned about vis-a-vis those developments in Europe and elsewhere?
Sure. Again, thanks for having me on, Tom, and hi, everybody in the Cipher Brief world. The Trump revolution, as it were, in both domestic, which doesn't really concern the Turks much, but foreign policy areas, is only basically the fourth wave that we've seen over the last few years. Just a few years ago, I remember analyzing the Biden 2021 national security strategy, and it was a good document that reflected the first of those waves, which is the end of the post-Cold War era and the return of great power competition, although Biden put it in slightly different words. Then we had, one after the other, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, breaking one of the basic tenets of the post-World War II order. We then had the dramatic, given what we had seen before with Iran slowly marching through the region, defeat all across the region of Iran and its various proxies in a very dramatic way by Israel after the Gaza attack, with the sometimes reluctant but still decisive support of the United States. Likewise, so far, holding off Putin and Russia with the sometimes uncertain and reluctant, but still decisive support of the United States in both administrations. And then finally, Trump. In this world, Turkey seems to be doing pretty well. First of all, Erdogan and the people around him all are realpolitik. He differs from most of his advisors in that he is a serious Islamist. How much that impacts, beyond rhetoric, his foreign or even domestic policy is something we've been all debating for 20 years. Let me say that you can rely on Erdogan to react in a realpolitik way. In an Islamic way, that depends on the situation, his mood, and the larger environment. And so realpolitik people are pretty comfortable in this new era. He's got the messy Middle East to his south, and he's got Russia and NATO to his north and northwest. He's in a good position. Turkey is a G20 country, one of the top 15 economies on most days. It has good energy relations with Russia, some with Iran, although he sees himself, as do most Turks, as competitors to both. They're quite effective these days in the Middle East, having rekindled relations with the Gulf states, notably Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis, who bailed Erdogan out financially a couple of years ago. And they're, of course, in most respects, although Poland is creeping up on them, the second largest, most powerful military force in NATO after us. They've played a crucial role in the Ukraine war by restricting Russian reinforcements into the Black Sea. They found an obscure paragraph in the Montreux Convention to do this, I think the first time ever, but it has been very effective. That gives Erdogan the leverage to also reach out to the Russians. They still import gas. Their banks still play footsie with the Russian banks, but they're also very supportive of Ukraine. Interestingly, Erdogan has long advocated for the policy that President Trump seems to be, as we speak, trying to pitch to Putin, which is this war makes no sense. It's a stalemate. You're not going to get back those territories that Russia has conquered. Erdogan in particular is unhappy about Crimea going to the Russians because of relations with the Crimean Tatars, who are part of the Ottoman Empire and religiously close to the Turks. But that notwithstanding, they can live with that. What they can't live with is Ukraine collapsing, or even the Ukrainian coastline, including Odessa, falling to the Russians. The Black Sea is Turkey's near abroad, and they will work with us and with NATO to ensure that Ukraine doesn't be defeated. On the other hand, they don't really see a future for Ukraine in NATO. They're willing to contribute under the right conditions, peacekeepers, to a post-ceasefire settlement. There's a lot of possible synergy between Washington and Ankara on this. The Middle East is more mixed. Again, Turkey is a effective counter to Iran in Syria and Iraq, particularly northern Iraq, among the Kurds, who have a good relationship with Erdogan, and in Azerbaijan. He's also more confident in those three areas because he's working hard to solve his own internal Turkish-Kurdish problem by a rapprochement with the PKK. This has pretty dramatic, mainly positive effects on not only the domestic situation in Turkey, but also the region. It will further strengthen Erdogan's many cards in his hands. The one downside, and this includes with the Trump administration, is Israel in general, and in particular, Gaza and Syria. The Turkish population, like Arab populations, have been aghast at the high civilian casualties in Gaza. They do not understand what Israel is doing. I certainly do. I think most fair people who have a realpolitik background do, but Islamic populations throughout the Middle East, including Turkey, don't. The problem is that Turkey is actually an effective democracy, unlike most Arab states, and therefore Erdogan has to pay attention to that, particularly as it's mainly his base, the more devout Muslims among the Turkish population who feel so strongly. So what has long been a good relationship with Israel right now is down the toilet, so to speak. In particular, the Bibi Netanyahu-Erdogan relationship, as I got to see firsthand when I was doing the Syria account a few years ago and had to deal with both of them, who had a commonality of interest in Syria, but were almost willing to tear it up to foil the other. They were that antagonistic to each other. And we see some of this now. The main way that this is being played out, and it's quite concerning, is in Syria. That's the other issue that Erdogan raised with President Trump. Erdogan, of course, is interested in the SDF, our partners in Syria in the fight against ISIS, who are at the same time the local branch of the PKK. But because Erdogan is working on a ceasefire with the PKK overall, he's willing to let the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurds in Syria, work out a deal with al-Ashari, the new leader of Syria. And they did so at the beginning of the week, and so that's looking a bit promising. The bigger problem right now with us in the middle is between Israel and Turkey, and that takes a little bit of background. The Turks and the Israelis both see Iran as the biggest threat to the region, and the second biggest threat to the region, Sunni jihadist extremism, and then in addition, the Turks, of course, see the PKK. But they have a commonality of interests on paper, but Gaza has soiled the sheets in the bilateral relationship, unfortunately. And in Syria, you have an interesting problem. And people will challenge me on this, but as far as I'm concerned, there are only three nation states in the Middle East, as I define nation states arbitrarily, which are Israel, Turkey, and Iran. More importantly, or equally importantly, those are the three militarily and diplomatically most powerful states, with MBS of Saudi Arabia gaining at least some ground on them diplomatically and certainly in economic policy. But still militarily the three biggest states. And what has happened in the culmination of events across the region since the 7th of October 2023 is that Iran is for the moment out. It's not or it's down, it's not out, and it will come back, I fear. But for the moment, it's down, and that leaves in the most important area of contestation over the past 20 years in the we and King Abdullah in particular of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, called the Shia Crescent. Syria has always been the center of it, and right now Iran is effectively out of Syria, and therefore the Israeli and the Turkish interests are colliding in some respects. This is unfortunate because, as I said, they both have an interest in a stable Syria, keeping Iran out and keeping the remnants of the Islamic State and other jihadist movements down. But the natural tendency in a realpolitik world, and that defines the world that both Netanyahu and Erdogan think correctly they're in, when you get two powers that have somewhat conflicting worldviews rubbing up against each other in a vacuum, you've got trouble, and that's what we have right now. So that's something that Washington normally would play the honest broker on, and we did so in the Trump one administration, and indirectly and in a kind of half-hearted way, Biden in the Biden administration. But right now, the Trump 2 administration is not really focused on Syria. They've done a great job in the rest of the Middle East. I mean, I have to say, for the pivot to Asia gang with a passion, they're doing a hell of a lot of Middle East stuff, and most of it very effectively, including the latest campaign against the Houthis. But in Syria, they've shown little interest, attention, or high-level involvement. And this is leaving the issue to staffs, many of whom are not yet on board. And the result is that the Israelis have tremendous sway in Washington over perceptions of Syria, which is al-Ashari, formerly al-Jilani, the current president of Syria, with his Hayat Tahrir al-Sham terrorist background, and the Turks, with Erdogan as the Islamic leader, are ever more a threat to Israel. The problem is, the more you act on this threat, and the Israelis are doing this by moving forces forward and doing some bombings of former Assad military holdings all throughout at least the south of the country, you create a threat even if one isn't there. So again, this is something that Washington will have to look out for. It's something that Erdogan raised in his conversation with the president. Finally, the other issue is military issues. The Turks want to be out from under the sanctions for having bought the S-400 system. They want to continue with the big F-16 sale that they brokered a couple of years ago in return for the vote on Sweden entering NATO. And they would actually like to get back into the F-35 program. So all in all, with Trump, they have a American leader who is more sympathetic to certainly Erdogan and Erdogan's rather authoritarian way of governing than Joe Biden or Barack Obama were. But nonetheless, there are some strains in the relationship, mainly because of the Israeli factor. I'll stop there.
Well, I was going to say almost like a lawyer would, no further questions, but I just have a couple because you've swept the region wonderfully, Ambassador. I really appreciate it. And so just let's say there is a meeting, and it sounds like there will be sometime soon. I wonder if we can use your expertise to just give us two answers from the two perspectives to one question. You're advising, this is an odd thing to say, but let's say you're advising President Erdogan and he's coming into this meeting. What's the one or two key things you would suggest that he wants to try to get from that meeting? Is it those sanctions lifted that you just mentioned? What's the key takeaway that he'd want to leave Washington with?
He needs a win. And the win would be on one of these military issues, because they're what the Turks refer to as remaining irritants in the relationship, and the Turks put a great deal of emphasis on them, kind of like President Trump puts great emphasis on balances of trade. It's an ideological thing as well as just a realpolitik thing. The second thing I would advise him to do, and I'm cheating because it's got two parts, is press Washington to use Turkey and consult with Turkey on going forward with Putin on Ukraine, given the key role Turkey has played in its good relations with both Zelensky and Putin, and the fact that Turkey is a powerful player. And then on Syria, urge uh, Trump to get more involved, probably to keep the troops on, even though Erdogan will say one or two bad things about the SDF because he has to. But basically say, hey, help me in stabilizing the country and work with the Israelis. We're not their enemy. I think those are the main things he'll raise. Certainly, if I were advising him, that's what I think he would be hearing from me.
And then last question, and this would be a more comfortable position for you perhaps, is let's say you're just outside the Oval Office and that meeting is tomorrow and you're advising the White House team. What are reasonable things that they should seek, sort of a couple of items on the agenda with President Erdogan arriving?
First, despite the good relationship between Erdogan and Trump, it has had explosive moments, including the famous General Mazloum letter that Trump, after getting it from Mazloum, sent on to President Erdogan, and so managed the meeting carefully in terms of atmospherics. They should be good, but they can go south more quickly than you can say Zelensky. That's the first thing. Second, that comes from experience.
Yeah.
Secondly, hear the man out. He's a ally. He won't nag you like the Western Europeans do on your domestic actions. And he has a realistic view of Iran, a realistic view of Turkey, rather of Russia, and he will probably ask you to help on Israel in one or another way.
Yeah. Okay. We're gonna have to leave it there. Hear the men out and no explosions. We'll
Yeah.
we'll keep that. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Okay. Thank you, Tom.
Really appreciate your being with us at the Cipher.
Okay, for sure.